Hi, everyone, and welcome to our ERAS Summit for 2022. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Sarah Godfrey. I am a cardiology fellow at UT Southwestern, and I'm also one of the senior residency consultants here at MST. So just in case you don't know about us at Med School Tutors, we are a large group of tutors from a diverse background who help people with the whole process of getting through medical school residency and beyond. And we particularly specialize in people with more untraditional tracks to residency, including FMGs, IMGs, DO candidates. So we are here for you if you have any questions or if we can help you at all along the way. So today, our different consultants we have today, me obviously, we also have Fred Bertino and Sana Majid, who are our senior residency consultants. So if at any point along the track today you have any questions, you can email the email right here at the bottom to get a free consultation with one of us or one of our other consultants. So here's kind of an overview of what we're going to do today. First, we're just going to go through the dates, what you need to do and when over this match process. And then we're going to talk about your sub-Is, your letters of recommendation, how to write a personal statement. And then Sana is going to come in and talk to you about how to address your red flags, how many programs and where you should apply, and how to prepare for virtual or in-person interviews. And then finally, Fred's going to come in and talk to you about the SOAP process and rank lists and some of our special circumstances like couples matching or if you're applying as an FMG, as well as the new supplemental ERAS application this year. We'll get into that later. And then at the end, all of us will be here for a panel to answer any of your questions that you have along the way. So let's start talking about the timeline and how to start the initial part of your ERAS application. So ERAS, hopefully all of you have registered by now to get a token to get into the website. That opened on June 9th. Starting on September 1st, you can actually start applying to residency programs, but the final deadline is September 29th. Between September 1st and September 29th, if you submit your application, it will be time-stamped on September 29th. So besides the peace of mind of applying early and having it done, there's no real benefit to applying September 1st versus the 29th. So I have to say it takes a while to assign all the documents to the different programs, so I would not start the night before. On September 29th, all of the residency programs can log in, download your applications as well as your MSPEs. Now, this is always confusing because ERAS and NRMP are two separate websites. ERAS is where you do your application and you apply to the programs. NRMP is where you register for the match and where you do your ranking and your final match results will come in. So starting on September 15th up through January, you can register with NRMP for the match. And then starting on February 1st, you can start playing around with your rank list and deciding how to rank your programs. Then you have to certify your list by March 2nd to enter the match. And then March 14th through 18th is your SOAP process through the match day. So on the Monday of that week, you'll get an email saying if you matched, and then the Friday of that week, you'll get an email letting you know where you matched. So in terms of what you should be doing throughout this whole process. So starting over the last couple of months, you're probably working on scheduling your sub-Is, starting on that CV, which is what you're going to copy and paste into ERAS come September. You're going to ask your letter writers for a letter of recommendation. You want to give them as much time as possible to write a strong letter. And you should be starting your personal statement. Now that we're in July, over the next month or two is when you're going to finish up all of these different parts of the application so that in September, when ERAS is ready to be submitted, you're all set to go. You have all the materials you need. In September, you will be submitting your ERAS application, and that's when, as I mentioned, you're going to register the match in NRMP. through October through January, you're going to start hearing from programs about if you got an interview offer, and then you'll be doing your interviews. Certain specialties tend to occur earlier than others, and so that you can kind of figure out by talking to other people applying into your specialty. February through March is where you can send your letters of intent. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means later, but basically that's your love letter to your favorite program. And then you submit your final match list by March 2nd. So getting into kind of the specifics of that timeline, sub-Is and letters of recommendation. Here are some of the questions that you guys sent in advance. So over the last year or two, because of COVID, there's been a significant limit on the number of sub-Is, which has been difficult for people to kind of get that experience at different away rotations. So some of the options now, you can do away sub-Is in person. They've reopened this year, but there are also online or telemedicine sub-Is that you can register for at different programs. So that can be kind of a loophole around getting more sub-Is at different programs. And then in terms of who to ask for letters of recommendation, we'll get into more of the specifics, but there's a wide range of different people that you can ask, including your attendings from your clinical rotations and sub-Is, but also people you've worked with in research or volunteer experiences. So the letters of recommendation. The number one thing that I can tell you about a letter of recommendation is that you want them to come from people who know you well, and can write you an enthusiastic letter of recommendation. Residency programs can recognize when they're seeing a template letter that doesn't have anything specific about you. So it's better to ask someone who's of a lower rank but knows you well than trying to get the chair of a department to write you a letter. The second thing is, depending on your specialty, not all of your letters have to come from that specialty. So in internal medicine, for example, you can have 2 letters from internal medicine, but you can also have a letter from pediatrics or surgery or other rotations that you really excelled on and you met an attending who got to know you very well. That's not true for all specialties, especially the surgical subspecialties, where they would want all of your letters from that intended specialty. The next thing I wanted to mention is you can, in very special circumstances, have a letter from someone who is not an MD. This is if you did a significant amount of volunteer work or research where maybe the person is a PhD or an MPH and they're more in the research or public health realm. I would limit that to 1 letter. The rest of them should be from physicians. And the last thing, which is not as important as the other things, but if at all possible, and you have 2 people who know you equally well, and one of them is a chair of the department and another person is an assistant professor, it doesn't hurt to go with the person of a higher rank. But this is not essential. If the person who knows you the best is the assistant professor, then that's the person you should ask. And I want to emphasize that you can never use a letter from a resident or a fellow. It's attendings only. So a little bit more of the specifics. So ERAS allows you to have 4 letters of recommendation per program. Now you can upload an unlimited number of letters of recommendation, but you can only assign 4 to each program. So if you're someone who might be double applying into 2 different specialties, then you would send, let's say, your 4 OB-GYN letters to your OB-GYN programs, and then your 4 family medicine letters to your family medicine programs. And as we mentioned earlier, or as I mentioned earlier, you really want to get high quality, enthusiastic letters rather than trying to get more or from people who have a more impressive resume. The last question that we get a lot of the time is, how do you ask someone for a letter of recommendation? It's kind of awkward. Everyone recognizes the power dynamic of an attending and a medical student, especially if you've only been working with them for 2 or 4 weeks. but attendings know, especially if you're on a sub-I, if they know that you're applying to residency this year, they're expecting. And if possible, I think it's always better to ask someone in person rather than email. But if you can't, because you're no longer in the same location, you can just send a very polite email asking them if they would feel comfortable writing you a strong letter of recommendation. Most attendings, if they don't feel like they can write you a strong letter, are going to tell you that they can't. And that's what you want them to tell you. You don't want them to write a lukewarm letter rather than telling you up front that they can't write it for you. So once you've found your people who are going to write your letters, how do you help them write the best letter they can for you? This is why having your CV or your resume updated with all of the information they need is really helpful. If you send that to them, they can include specific clinical experiences or research experiences you've had. It really helps it be a personal letter. And they may even, if your CV is written very well, use some of your language to kind of emphasize the characteristics about you that you think are most important. Some of them will also want to see at least a draft of your personal statement. It doesn't have to be the final version, but it'll give them a sense about what kind of doctor you're hoping to be, and then they can include that in your letter. Once they've submitted your letters, you want to make sure you thank them, send them thank you notes, let them know how the match goes. But the follow-up that's the most, I think, challenging or awkward can be if you're getting close to the deadline and you don't see that the letter is uploaded. So in those circumstances, it is okay to send polite emails reminding them about the deadline. I would not send more than one every couple of weeks, just to make sure that they know about the deadline. So let's transition over to the personal statement. I see that there are a lot of questions about letters of recommendation, but I will definitely get to all of them at the end of this section. So for the personal statement, some of the questions that you guys sent in were basically, how do you start? I feel like that's the hardest part. No one ever knows, where do you begin? And I think the best way to start is to just sit down and start writing. It may not be in the right order, it may not be the content that you eventually use, but starting to brainstorm what it is that you think you want to say in your personal statement is the first step. So as you can see, a poll is just popping up now to ask you guys what you think you're going to write about. The next question people asked was, how do you tailor that application to a specific specialty? The whole point of a personal statement is to give a sense of who you are and why you're going to be great for this residency or great for this specialty. So you should kind of advocate for why you're a good fit for that specialty. The next question is how to address red flags. Sana is going to get into this a little bit more later, but we highly recommend that if you have any red flags in your application, that you should address it head on in the personal statement. Program directors can read between the lines. They can see in your application if there's something that's a little bit concerning, and it's better to get ahead of it in your personal statement rather than trying to hope they don't see it. The last question is whether or not to talk about COVID in your personal statement. We'll get into that a little bit, but unless you had a very significant experience, I think overall it's best not to mention it in your personal statement. So general rules for the personal statement is that they're personal. It's about you. It's about who you are and who you're going to be as a doctor. You want to keep it under a page. You want to make sure that you're not telling a physician what their specialty is. If you write just a page about what is orthopedic surgery, it doesn't really tell much about you. And it shouldn't be, explaining a medical phenomenon. It should be about who you are. I'm looking at these poll results here, and it seems like people want to talk about a clinical experience, a personal experience, but a lot of you haven't quite figured out what to write about yet. So let's talk about what some of the best things to write about are. You want to make sure it's organized. Often, if you're stuck, chronological is a good way to go in telling your story. It's either that or each paragraph should have a theme. The second thing is you need to show that you've had experience with this specialty, you've thought about it, and you have a good reason why you are a good fit for it. And the last thing is, which can be hard for some people, is you really want to advocate for yourself. You want to say why you're a great candidate. You've done some wonderful things and you are prepared to be an excellent resident at their program. So here's the general format that I recommend. There are different ways to do it, but the easiest way to think about this is your first paragraph is an introduction to who you are. So it can be a story about yourself, it can be some of your personal goals for your career. I wouldn't get too outside the box. Try to avoid quotes or things that are a little bit cliche. Really, it should just be an introduction to who you are. And then the next couple of paragraphs should be examples of experiences that have led you to this point to apply to residency. Usually going in chronological order makes sense about what led you to study what you did in college, which then led you to apply to medical school. What are the experiences in medical school that really led you to apply to this specialty? That's sort of the format. And then the last paragraph should summarize why you're a great fit for this specialty. And it's also great to include a sentence or two about your vision for the future. What kind of doctor do you want to be? You know, if you're applying into internal medicine, you should tell them what your future goals are, because that could be you want to be an interventional gastroenterologist. It could be that you want to be a primary care doctor in a rural setting. There are infinite ways that your career could go, and programs recognize that you may not stick to that. You may change your mind when you explore different things in residency, but they want to see that you really thought about your future and that you've investigated what some of those options are. So some additional pearls of wisdom. Try not to be too creative. When in doubt, kind of avoid cliche phrases, sarcasm, jokes. Really, it should just be a sincere description of who you are and what you want to do. The next one is a little controversial, but I think a lot of the example personal statements that you see online are going to tell you to start with a patient story. It's been very common over the last 5 years to talk about this meaningful clinical experience with a patient you had. But now, since everyone has started doing that, a lot of program directors say that they just skip that paragraph. Because if you don't have a meaningful clinical experience from medical school, that would be pretty rare. Most people have a reason that they're going on to residency. The next thing is to go chronologically, if you can. You can also go thematically, but when in doubt, telling it in order makes the flow of your personal statement go smoother. Spell check. It seems intuitive, but just make sure that your grammar is on point. You don't want someone to point out a typo in your interview. And something that's here is if you're doing individual personal statements, so let's say you're doing one for each program or you're doing one for each region of the country, make sure you have labeled them so that you assign the right personal statement to the right program. This happens every year where someone wrote one personal statement all about how they want to move to the South and they assign it to a Northeastern program. That doesn't look great. In general, this strategy is not advised because there are too many possibilities for error. It's better to write one great personal statement and send it to all of the programs, unless there is a specific program or region of the country that you have a wonderful reason why that is where you need to go. This is the part about COVID. I think it's hard to write about your experience as a medical student during COVID. When you're sending that to attendings and physicians who were in the pandemic, it can come across not the way that you want it to. So unless you had a very significant experience, I would not include that in your personal statement. The next one here we have is not trying to be unique. I think I've kind of alluded to this already, but it's better to be a little bit boring and have a traditional personal statement than to go weird. Writing your personal statement as a poem or a metaphor or something like that, a lot of program directors are not going to take that seriously. You want this to be a professional application to your career. And then the last tip that I can really, really emphasize is that you guys should have started your personal statement by now. If you have not, today is the day. You want to write as many drafts as it takes to write the perfect personal statement. And for most people, this is going to take at least a month to go through. Many people do 3 to 5 different versions, and you're going to want multiple people to lay eyes on it to make sure it is the best version of you that you can present to a program. So it looks like about half of you guys have started. Wonderful. And it looks like half of you guys have not yet, which is okay, but start very soon. So you want to make sure that you have done everything possible to make your application shine. So in terms of, you've gotten your letters of recommendation, you've written your personal statement, you've copied and pasted your CV into the experiences in ERAS. You're ready to go. In those last 2 weeks before September 29th, you want to go through and make sure that your personal statement has no typos, that it is assigned to the right programs. Go through your experiences, make sure they're all appropriate, no typos. And then the last section that I think a lot of people either overthink or overlook is the hobbies section. You don't need to think about this too hard. It's just for them to get a sense of who you are. And in a lot of interviews, people get tired about asking about clinical experiences. Sometimes they just want to get to know you as a person. So writing about your real hobbies, give them an opportunity to ask you about, what do you like to cook? What marathons have you run in? Where have you traveled to? What's the last book that you read? It makes it into a more personal interview. So just think about what are some interesting things about yourself that you might want to talk about on your interview day. So for the last part, just make sure that everything is in on September 29th by 9 a.m. I would suggest starting at least 2 weeks in advance, because it can take a lot longer to put in all of those experiences than you think it will, and to assign the documents to different programs. And then once it's in, you can take a deep breath, relax, and the next part, you're just waiting to start hearing back from programs. So now, I think we've got a lot of different questions from all of you. And Sana is going to join us now and ask me some of the most interesting ones.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah, for going through all of that. That was very helpful as always, but always good to sort of hear it again and get a little bit of the insight. We got a lot of great questions. Some of them are going to be addressed later on during the webinar, so I'm going to leave those ones for a bit later, but the ones that were really, I thought, especially pertinent for what you discussed today. There was one that was, I think, really interesting about what your opinion is about reapplying and what people who are reapplying should do in regards to their personal statements. How should they tailor it? Should they address it right in that? Should they leave it somewhere else? What are your thoughts on that?
So for people who are reapplying, I think you should write a new personal statement, just because you need to address what you've been doing for the last year, keep them up to date about what's been going on with your experiences. I don't think you necessarily need to say in the personal statement that you're reapplying. Most program directors will just look at the dates on your application and be able to figure that out. And I think the other big thing is to take a look at what you thought were some weaknesses from your application last year. Is it that you applied late? Did you apply to not enough programs? Did you only apply in New York City and California, the most competitive areas in the country? And kind of think through what are some areas that you could try to improve your chances this time around. And if you're really struggling with any of that, you can definitely reach out to us. We have seen it all, and so we can try to help you figure out how to problem solve.
Perfect. That is super helpful. Another great question that we got quite a few questions about letters of recommendation and sort of the best way. So a couple of different ones. So the first one I'll ask you is, if your letter writer is not getting back to you, what is the appropriate number of times you should email them? How often should you email them? How do you approach that?
That is the worst feeling. It's anxiety provoking. You do have to also recognize that these are attendings who are busy clinicians, and hopefully they have not forgotten about you and they're just busy. I think it is reasonable, if you're far enough out, to email once a month in July and August. Once you're getting closer to it, maybe once a week up until. But if you're not consistently getting any kind of response, it might be worth thinking about getting a backup letter just in case someone kind of flakes on you, which is the worst case scenario. It's not super common, but if there's anyone else who you would feel comfortable asking at the last minute, that might be worth it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great. Another just point that I would add is the letter writers have no idea if you used or didn't use their letters. So I know quite a few people who asked more people than they had letters available to send, just to be extra safe. So perfect. Another letter related question. So this is again sort of touching on the reapplicants. For people who have applied in previous cycles, can they use old letters? And if so, should they have their letter writers update? Can they just use the old letter, or should they get new letters?
So you can use the old letter if it was someone who really knows you well and can advocate for you, but I would ask them to update it just about anything that you've done in the last year. If there are any other experiences or anything else they can include, it'll take them 5 minutes to add a couple of sentences, and then it looks like a more up-to-date letter. If that's not a possibility, you can still use the one you had before. But if you feel like maybe the person didn't write you the best letter, then if you've got doubt at all, I would think about asking someone else.
Perfect. Awesome. And then I'll give you one more letter related question. And this is a tricky one. So for students who are applying, foreign medical graduates who are applying in this cycle, is it better to get a letter from a US-based doctor in a different specialty than the one you're applying into versus a doctor from outside of the States who is in the specialty that you're applying to?
So it's a little bit tricky, and everyone's circumstances are different in terms of what letters they can get, especially since in the last 2 years, visas have been difficult and travel have been difficult. So I'll put that caveat up top. For most of my IMG applicants, I would say in an ideal world, all of your letters are from American physicians, preferably in your specialty. But if that's not possible, which for a vast majority of people it's not, you can try to do half and half, where you do 2 letters that are from American physicians who maybe you did a sub-I or something where they might not know you as well. And then you can have 2 letters from physicians in your country or the country where your medical school is, who know you really well. And that kind of balances out, that shows that you have American clinical experience, but also that people from your medical school really advocate for you. And just in terms of the specialty part, as I mentioned before, not all of them have to be from your specialty unless you're applying into very specific like surgical subspecialties. If you're applying into ortho or derm or ENT, they should all be in your specialty. If you're applying into internal medicine, psychiatry, family medicine, pediatrics, you can have a mix.
Perfect. All right, I'll give you one more question before we wrap up your section, Sarah. So what else? Another one that we've been getting a couple of times about is about experiences for ERAS and how to sort of curate those experiences. How far back should people go, and what would you qualify as a relevant experience in terms of what people do outside of, you know, the stuff in the classroom?
That's a really great question that we didn't talk about yet. So you should only include experiences from college on, unless you did something so spectacular in high school, like you were in the Olympics or you had a published paper. Shouldn't include. From college on, you can include any research at all, even if it's not in medicine or not in your specialty, that can be included. Volunteer work, clinical or not, can be included. So if you did Habitat for Humanity or you did a service trip or anything like that, relevant. And then in terms of extracurriculars, if you had a leadership position, I think that's relevant. So if you were the chair of your orchestra in college, even though that has nothing to do with medicine, it's an interesting thing about you and it shows that you have leadership skills. So those are things that you can include as well.
Perfect. All right. So I know we have a lot of great questions coming in, and we're going to try and address them again, in the different sections as we sort of go through more information. And certainly at the end, we'll have a lot of time for the rest of our live Q&A. Before we break, I did want to share the winner of our raffle today, who has won free residency consulting. So that's Brittany Cook. So if Brittany is here, feel free to send us a message. But she's the winner of our free residency consulting as part of being on this webinar today. So congratulations, Brittany. And hi, Brittany. And then so we will be back. And so we will be back in just about 5 minutes. So you guys can go take a bathroom break, grab some water, and we'll be back with you shortly. All right. Next part of our presentation, we're going to be talking about red flags, as well as where to apply and preparing for interviews. So just as a brief introduction, my name's Sana. I'm a PGY3 radiology resident at Brigham and Women's. And I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit more about something that we get asked a lot about from a lot of our students, is how to address different parts of the application if you have things that your worried programs may be concerned about when trying to decide whether or not to hire you. So I'll start by saying that everybody has something. Nobody's perfect. Everyone has something in their story that was not 100% perfect. You know, no one got 290s, all honors, everything on their application. And we've all had very different life experiences that have brought us to medicine. And ERAS is designed to show everyone all of the strengths and weaknesses of your application. And it's really up to the residencies to decide. But that's not to say that you cannot spin things in a positive light and talk about the experiences you've had, because in the vast majority of cases, those experiences, A, I think make you a better doctor, and B, will show that you've overcome things and demonstrate resilience, which is so important, particularly in this field. So I think that it can be used in a good way. The other things that we're going to talk about during this section is where to apply, how many programs to apply to, what do I do if I'm reapplying, what do I do if I want to apply to more than one specialty to cover my bases. So we're going to touch on all of that. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about virtual interviews and sort of the process behind how to prepare for them and how to make the most of them, because it's I guess now that we've been doing it for a year, so it's not quite as brand new as it was last year, but it certainly takes some adjusting. So we'll go through a little bit of what we recommend in terms of preparing for that. So when talking about red flags, it's important to think about what constitutes an actual red flag. So what we consider to be things that require addressing on your application itself would be something like failing a course, failing one of your step exam or level exams, or poor evaluations on a rotation that stand out. And so not average evaluations, but like specifically poor ones, talking about how maybe something negative about you. What are not red flags? Getting a B. It will be very annoying if you say that, oh, I got a B and that is not a red flag. Taking a leave of absence is also not a red flag. Withdrawing from a course and also extending your medical school timeline. So a lot of people extend for research, for family reasons, etc. So there are certain things that may not be the classic pathway of how people go through medical school, but that does not make it a red flag. The things that are red flags are things that people would question whether or not you're ready to become a resident and perform well in that program. And so what I'll say is the best way to address red flags is to be very upfront and honest. And so we go through it. I have sort of this formula that we use at MST, but I also feel like it's just a great formula whenever you're addressing weaknesses in general in your life, is to be honest and upfront and to really not make excuses. Don't say, oh, well, you know, like that professor just really didn't like me, you know, something like that. Just say, you know, for whatever reason, this is what happened, and just own the experience. And then it's also important to show growth from that. But at the end of the day, just as I was saying before, what you want to demonstrate is resiliency. You want to demonstrate that you've grown, that you've improved, that you've taken that experience, that feedback, that sort of weakness of yours, and you've made it into something more positive, and why that's going to ultimately make you a better doctor, why that means that you'll be that much better for it, that much better with your patients. And what we've generally found is the personal statement is the best place to do this. One of the questions we got earlier in the chat during Sarah's section was about, should I have my letter writer address this? Where is the best place for this to take place? Generally, the personal statement, this should really be coming from you, because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be in that residency, and they want to, the programs want to see your own objective growth. So generally, that's the spot to get into it. So using that format is sort of the yellow being the own what happened, right? Failing step one, major step back. I didn't have a great relationship with how to balance wellness and how to balance school and my academic sort of my work-life balance. I didn't have a great sense of that. And then I found A, B, and C. That's what made it better, right? I found ways to deal with it. I worked on my time management. I worked on my priorities. I created a study schedule. And then outcome, I got an above average score. So I think really those three sort of, it's almost formulaic in a way, is just to say, I recognized something that I wasn't good at, something that was wrong about the way I was studying or, you know, interacting with patients, whatever it might have been. And this is what I did to sort of improve it. This is how I worked on it. And then this is how I've proved that I've overcome that. I've overcome that, and I've come from it, and I've grown. And this is why I'm going to be a great doctor. That's sort of my three-step formula for how to address that. Another one, so this is more talking about like a clinical experience. So this is talking about, you know, patient, or not a patient, but a student gets a C- in a course on the medicine rotation specifically, and then what the story was, right? So what ended up happening, without, you know, I'm not going to read through this whole thing for you, but just got flustered when being asked about the exam, ended up making up findings, and just because they weren't sure, they were like, oh yeah, I think it was normal, even though they know they didn't do the exam. And then ultimately saying, okay, patient's care was delayed when they had a real finding. And then I saw that the team lost trust in me. They didn't trust me when I was doing exams in the future, because maybe I was just doing things, you know, just getting flustered and not answering correctly. So just really showing that, okay, I've taken that experience. I understand why I got that grade. I understand why I got that feedback. And now I've grown from it. This is why I tried that much more to be better. And it's a very natural impulse. I think that most people, so in this case especially, most people will understand that when you're getting asked questions as a medical student, you're trying to, you know, impress these attendings and you're trying to do all these things. But to really recognize, you know, I recognize that. This is how I changed it. This is why I'm going to be better for it. So again, I think the big thing is really any sort of red flags, any sort of hiccups in your application, own it in the personal statement, own, explain, prove, fix, and prove it. And so just really use that formula and try not to make excuses and perseverate on it, because I think that really will turn people off. So just show how you've grown. And then also try and use that personal statement. As Sarah said, this is a lot of those things that Sarah was talking about too. It shouldn't be the entire personal statement, right? It should be, your personal statement should be honest. It should be original. It should be very personal. And talk about why you're here, why you wanted to go into medicine, why you wanted to go into the specialty, and why you think that you're going to be a good fit for the field. Okay, so that was, I know, a little bit of a whirlwind on red flags, and certainly I know we've got a lot of questions coming in about those, so we'll address those later. But the next thing we wanted to address a little bit is where you should be applying, and how to approach making your list of places that you want to apply on ERAS. So the first question that we get is, how many programs should I be applying to? And what I always say, and if you've been on one of my webinars before, I say every single time, look at the NRMP Math Statistics document. The NRMP every single year releases a document from the year before and the year, or it's dating back several years, that basically says, if you're applying into internal medicine, otolaryngology, derm, radiology, etc., for every single specialty, they have a list of how many programs people applied to, the average number needed to match, what programs were ranking as far as what's more important, step 1 scores, AOA status, number of research experiences, etc. And it really provides you a breakdown of what the average applicant who matched versus the average applicant who didn't match has. And that should give you an idea. What I will also say is that the data from last year is probably most beneficial for people who are applying at this moment. So certainly, because we're, again, still in a virtual interview world this year, last year's data will be most representative because people applied to more programs. People had a much wider net. Because A, they didn't get to see the programs, B, it costs less money to travel to these programs, to go on all of these interviews, and C, you just had no idea that most people had fewer sub-internships, etc., so they didn't have the opportunity to go and audition. So I think that last year's data will be especially important in looking for what your plans are. As far as where to apply, or knowing what programs to apply to, so program websites I put on here because they can be useful. You can get a lot of information about, what sort of programs are you really interested in medical education? Are you really interested in global health? Are you interested in research? And a lot of those things will be available on the program websites. A lot of that is also available on Doximity. Doximity has a residency page that goes through all of the different information for all of these different residencies as well. But what I really think is most valuable is word of mouth. Talk to people who have gone to your medical school, talk to people at different programs, and especially in the specialties that you want to work in, because every specialty at the same hospital, specialty to specialty, will be very, very different. So really talking to residents is the #1 way to do that. And sometimes that could just be as simple as emailing a program coordinator and saying, hey, do you have emails of any residents that I could talk to? Set up a phone call. I think that those are really, it takes a lot of work, but this is going to be anywhere between 3 to 7 years of your life. So it's very important to get it right. And so I think that it could be a valuable thing to just talk to residents themselves and get a sense of what they're happy and unhappy about. And then what to look for in a program. I touch a little bit on this later too, but it really depends on what your career goals are. Are you, as I sort of mentioned before, interested in education? Do you want to be in academics? Do you want to be in private practice? And sort of getting a sense of where do graduates go? So again, that same thing, talk to the residents in the program. I think there's really no substitute for those conversations, because that will give you the best sense of what the culture of the residency is and where people go after. I think a few of the considerations and what to look for are, so #1 is location. I think there was a study done a few years ago which showed what is the #1 thing that people pick their residency on, and it is location. So most of us, we're at a point in our lives where we're thinking about where do we want to live long term, and I think that that's a very important thing to think about, because at the end of the day, residency is a big part of your life, 100%. But it hopefully is not your entire life. So when you leave the hospital, are you going to have a support system? Are you going to have friends? Are you going to have your family nearby? Are those things important to you? Do you want to be in a big city? Do you want to be more in a suburb? Do you want to be rural? So all of those things. So location is going to be number one for most of you. What is the residency community like? Are you at an academic institution? Do you want to be at a heavy hitting research institution versus do you want to be at more of a community program with a more, bread and butter and less of the, tertiary care complicated cases? Are there any unique experiences? So something that I started to realize during the process is, are we at a level 1 trauma center? Do they do renal transplants here? Do you have a children's hospital? What kind of community are you serving? Because that will very much affect how your residency goes and what kind of cases you see and the type of training you obtain. And think about whether that aligns with your long-term goals. Because, not all, you don't have to have all of these things. I'm not saying the program you go to has to have these things, but if you want to be a trauma surgeon, then you probably want to be at a level 1 trauma center. So just taking those things into consideration. And then of course, call schedule, because as I really like to emphasize this to all of my students is that your life outside of work is very, very important. And I think has a lot more to do with your overall happiness. So I think it's really important to say, how much time do you actually get outside of work? And do you get to spend time with your friends and family and loved ones, so that you can make the most of that time too. Okay. Another thing that we have gotten a lot of questions on, and I'm sure we'll address a little more in the Q&A section, is applying to multiple specialties. So this is something that can and should be done by, IMGs, non-IMGs, US medical grads, anyone applying to competitive specialties. A lot of people do this. And so one thing is talking about personal statements. So generally, my rule of thumb, and Sarah and Fred can weigh in on when we discuss as a larger group later, I think it is best to have separate personal statements for every specialty you apply into, with maybe a few exceptions. So for example, internal medicine and family medicine are probably similar enough that you could probably write a very similar personal statement for both of those. However, if you're applying into, for example, radiology versus general surgery as your sort of two of choice, those probably require different personal statements. And so I would write different personal statements for each specialty. Another question we get a lot is how to approach letters of recommendation. A, if you don't know which specialty you're applying to yet, or B, if you're going to send it to both programs. And I think the rule of thumb is just to be completely upfront in your letter writers and say, hey, I'm really interested in this specialty, but I'm also interested in this specialty, and I think I'd be happy in either, but I am going to be applying to both just to optimize my chances in the match. And, I would just love if your letter was, applicable to both, or, if I would be able to say generic, or I wouldn't use the word generic, but say something if your letter would be, appropriate to send to both programs. I think that that's the best way to approach that, because people understand that. People know that, you have to cast a wide net. And then as far as disclosing to programs, I think this is a question we get a lot. In general, I would say try not to, because people want to think that your dream job is the program that they're at. So I would generally say no. And another question we get is applying to the same hospital in different specialties. And it's just, medicine is a much smaller world than you think. And people talk. So in general, I would say try and cast a wide net and don't tell too many of the programs that you're planning to do that, because I think, unfortunately, for, as very real a situation as it is, I just don't see it helping your chances. So it would just be better to not. Another question that we get a lot at MST is about reapplicants. So the first thing is, where do I address this? When do I talk about this? And I think, head on in the personal statement is a great place to address this, because people will know you've applied before. And I think it's important to sort of talk about, in the same way as we talked about in the red flags, sort of address it head on and talk about what you've done to make yourself a stronger applicant. Did you spend more time doing research? Did you spend more time clinically? Did you do more rotations? Talk about why you're a better applicant and what you've done in that time to sort of enhance your application. And then as far as where to apply, I think just in general, I would apply more broadly. Even though you've had the time to strengthen your application, at the end of the day, I think that the reapplication process is extremely emotionally grueling, and to have to go through it once is a lot. To have to go through it twice would be, even more. So try and just cast as broad a net as you're, able to do. And I think that is generally the best strategy. Okay. And so finally, the last thing that we wanted to touch on in this sort of component of this section of our webinar was about virtual interviews. So for better or worse, virtual interviews are still with us this year. Most programs will be performing virtual interviews, though I don't know that programs have sent out specific notifications regarding that yet. And so what does that entail? So what's lucky for us this year is that we have a little bit of a template from what they did last year. And so a lot of programs, so certainly not all, are doing virtual happy hours the night before. Some of them will send you like a little gift basket or a little drink, and then you sort of have an opportunity to mingle with the residents. And I think it can be really, really useful to go to those because I think I've sort of been beating a dead horse here, talking to the residents, there's really no substitute for that because you get a sense, are there residents there? Or do they have time off to be able to come and mingle with you guys? And do they have the emotional energy and capacity to do that? And B, how are they interacting with each other? Are they happy? Do they seem like they're friends? What's the dynamic at those interviews? And then at those interactions. Another thing is a lot of video previews, and programs have been sending out a lot of virtual information, and it is a little bit of overload. It's a lot, and it can feel like a lot to watch all these videos and like prepare for them and then sort of go through this entire process. But I think it is really valuable because it shows to watch them, because it shows you're invested and it shows that you're putting in the effort in, making the best of a obviously not ideal situation. And instead of the traditional sort of longer 1-hour interviews, we've seen a lot more short interviews with multiple people, so like 20 minutes with one person, 15 minutes on a different program, a lot of breakout sessions talking about like, we're going to talk a little bit about this research pathway that we have in our residency or this education pathway we have in our residency. So a lot of opportunities for things like that. And then in general, we've been seeing, as I mentioned before, people are applying to more places and people are going on more interviews. And I think that will be the case this year as well. So it's important to plan that for your schedule, but just have that in your mind as you apply. And then sometimes people are doing, more interviews after their interview date as well. Okay, as far as virtual logistics, so what we generally recommend is to avoid the virtual background. So here you can see my lovely bedroom background, but what we have been telling our students is really just have a neutral, plain, hopefully minimal distractions background to conduct your interview in. And I think that generally looks more professional than the virtual backgrounds do. Internet connection is, of course, very important. If you are able to hardwire in, then that is preferable to Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi can, depending on your connection, be spotty. But certainly I would test out ahead of time where you're going to be doing it, see how the internet connection is, etc. Lighting. I know a lot of people got the ring lights for the virtual interview season, but in general, light should be coming towards you, not light behind you, because that will just obstruct your face and it'll make the lighting look weird. You'll look like you're in the shadows. So light towards you, not behind you. And then minimal background noise. As much as you're able, we are all real humans, we have real life, but as much as you're able to be in an environment, if you don't have, screaming family members or anyone else in the background, is preferable. All right. And then general do's and don'ts. So again, as I mentioned, look at your video preview beforehand, just open up the photo booth app, whatever you have, Just take a look and see what your background looks like, see what you look like, see how the lighting is. Be fully dressed, wear pants. I think that most of you would have done that anyways, but you just never know if something happens and you have to stand up. You just want to be prepared. Turn do not disturb on your computer. Some people, get the email notifications or the text message notifications on their laptop. Turn those off, and then prepare a list of questions and make sure you're taking notes. Make sure you're being diligent, because again, it just shows that you're invested. It's so easy during these interviews to sort of like sit back and just like relax and be very passive. Try and be as active as you're able, because that does come across during the interview day. Do not look at your phone. Put your phone away, different room, do not disturb. And then it's very tempting during these interviews to have like another screen up where you have all of your answers pre-written, but people can tell. People can tell if you're A, reading, but B, if you have this canned answer. Try and talk naturally. Try and talk as if you're having an actual conversation, because that's the point. At the end of the day, people just want to know that you're someone that they can converse with and be friendly with. And then multitask. Yeah, don't be doing anything else while you're doing the interview day. Treat it like a real interview. I know it's virtual, so it's very tempting to, do all of these, send other emails, et cetera, in the background. Treat it like a real interview. Treat it like you're there in person. Okay. Other things, so no notifications, do not disturb, no multitasking. Try and relax a little bit as far as being casual and sitting, but try not to be recumbent, to lean back and be too casual. But try and just feel natural as much as you can. Never, ever, ever be late. I think that as much as you're able, if the interview day starts at 7 a.m., try and get there at 6:50. You never know what's going to happen with the internet. You never know what's going to happen with logging in, and is the Zoom going to work? You just want to have that buffer time to be able to be sure. And then again, just don't over rehearse. Try and sound natural. Some what if questions we get. So what if my cat walks across the screen? What if my roommate runs through? What if my child starts crying? And I think at the end of the day, and similar, what if my computer crashes? What if my internet goes out? I think that it's just really important to recognize that you're a real person. These people are real people. And at the end of the day, it seems very stressful, this interview, but once you're actually at the program, you realize these are all just normal people going about their days, and they're just coming and interviewing you to see what you're like, to see if you'd be a good fit. And so just say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me just take care of this for a moment, because they know that A, the virtual setting is not ideal, and B, that you're a real person with a life outside. And honestly, it's an opportunity to talk about those things. If your pet runs across, then you can say, oh, I'm sorry, it's my cat. She's been blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Maybe they have a cat, maybe they don't. Doesn't matter. Just take it as an opportunity to talk about yourself as a real person, because I really think that that's something that sometimes we miss in these interviews. And then, in just general, same thing. The computer crashes, I think really it's very, very important to have the contact information for the program coordinator. The program coordinators are generally the ones running these days. Have that contact information, have a cell phone or email, whatever, just readily available, so that you can use your phone to shoot a quick text and explain what's going on and that you're working on it. And they'll understand. And, you sort it out from there. See if you need to move to another room, reboot your computer, etc., and just sort of take it from there. It's, not everything is going to go perfectly, but that's okay. People are not going to hold, computer crashes against you. All right. So I know we have been getting a lot of questions. So we will see as people come through here. And I believe that Fred, oh, perfect. Fred is going to join us and take me through some of the questions here.
Hey, Sana, good to see you. Am I coming in?
Yeah, how are you? Yes, everything
Great.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Really awesome section covering what you would need to know about not only red flags, personal statements, but also kind of the virtual interview season. I know that that's definitely what's on everybody's mind, and it's a weird time because, as you can imagine, and nobody really knows how to advise on this kind of thing, not even programs do. So that's kind of a very unusual standpoint for a lot of applicants this year. And as you correctly predicted. That is where most of our questions are coming from, both kind of split between red flags, but also kind of interview etiquette. So I have a couple of ones jotted here from our chat, and as new ones come in, I'm certainly happy to ask you. But going back to the red flag discussion, is a long leave of absence something to be explained? I know before you mentioned that it's not a red flag, but if there is a gap in your medical school education, is that something that needs to be discussed in the personal statement? For example, what if you had to leave to take time to take step 1 or 2?
Right, right. Yeah, so I think it depends on the reason that you took the leave of absence. And certainly, you know, everyone's individual situations are different. So please feel free to reach out to us depending on what your circumstances are. But using the example of taking that extra time to take step 1 or step 2. So in that case, I think it can be appropriate to address that in the personal statement, and say, you know, this is sort of my experience taking the step exam. You know, this is how I was studying initially. And what I learned, or for whatever reason, was that this was not working. And, you know, I was not able to, you know, successfully feel like I was where I needed to be at the end of my study period. So I had to take more time. And then how did you work on study sort of strategies, et cetera, so that you would, A, be able to pass and be able to pass well? So I think it's, you sort of, again, I know I'm coming back to that same sort of formula over and over again, but really the big thing is, A, why weren't you able to do it? Like what was the sort of the cause of why you needed to take that time? And then what did you do at that time to make yourself, you know, exceed or excel and succeed in that on the step exam? And then how are you using that, sort of the lessons from that in your future? So I think that if you use that sort of formula, then that's completely appropriate, and I think very reasonable to include in the personal statement.
That's awesome. That definitely helps with clarification. And I guess just to kind of take that one step further, let's think about it from the flip side. So let's say you had to take a leave of absence for a personal reason. Maybe there was a death in the family, or maybe you had personal medical issues that you had to tend to, or really personal things that just probably don't matter or are nobody else's business except for your own. Is that worth describing in the personal statement ad nauseum, or is simply just a quick one-liner in the ERAS section dedicated to that reasonable enough?
I definitely err on the side of the latter. So just as you said, like, they're personal things that are no one's business but your own. So things like that, really just saying, you know, for family reasons or for personal health reasons, I had to take a leave of absence, the end. And, you know, if a program's nosy about it, that honestly tells you more about the program than you probably need to know. So I think that anything that's not really like a specific challenge relating to your ability to be a doctor and your ability to be a good resident, it's nobody's business. And I think, you know, certainly throw in a line because they're going to be like, oh, there's just a blank and we have no idea what this blank is. Fine. I think that's reasonable. But beyond that, I personally don't think it's necessary to go more into it.
Got you. That's very, very helpful. I think I agree in that statement too. It's just not anybody else's business if it's truly a personal reason.
Yep. Yeah.
Another question here. Where do you categorize something like low board scores, but board scores that are in fact passing? These are maybe below average. Is that a red flag? I mean, you did pass on the first time. So is that something to be discussed, or is that not really something that should need to be addressed?
Yeah, so I generally err on the side of not putting it in your initial ERAS application. I would say that this is not something that needs to be, you know, addressed in like the personal statement, et cetera. What I will say is, if and when you're interviewing at these programs, I think then it can be appropriate to say, you know, unfortunately I didn't do as well on the standardized tests as I would have hoped to, but, you know, I tried to make up for it in my clinical experiences, right? My research experiences, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are not great standardized test takers. That's why, you know, that's why we exist, because people aren't good at standardized tests. And so what's really important is just to say, excelled in, all of these other things. I'm really trying to focus on these things, and this is why I'm getting better. And certainly if you can show a delta between, step 1, step 2, et cetera, that would be extremely helpful. But even if that's not the case, I don't think I personally don't feel that qualifies as a red flag by any means.
Understood. So just to reiterate, it sounds like a real red flag when it comes to exam scores is something along the lines of you not passing the test.
Correct.
And then having you take it and then passing it again and then explaining that reason, versus just having maybe below average scores, but you were able to pass on the first time. That shouldn't really be an issue. That's going to be left up for eventually the program to decide where they will rank you in the long run, because at that point, I guess it's important to mention, the application is sealed and done. That envelope is sent, you've
Right.
got your CV.
Right.
There's not much you can do about it at that point. So
Yeah.
as long as you put your best foot forward in your statement and explained a real red flag. So thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely.
Would you, in terms of timelines, because I know that we have a lot of international colleagues on the call here.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, because this is the U.S. system, we've got a series of exams that everybody's very familiar with, whether it be the USMLE, the COMLEX. Many of these students, I imagine this would fall into the category of the USMLE, have graduated from allopathic medical schools overseas and now are in the process of applying over here and take the USMLE exams on a different schedule because they've already completed medical school. Is that in itself a red flag, having to take the exams later based on their graduation timeline elsewhere?
Yeah, so absolutely not. And I think that the main reason I say that is because most medical schools, most residency programs have had international medical graduates applying to those programs. And so they have at least some degree of familiarity with the timeline. And certainly they're exceptionally, or I would hope, they would be much more understanding of that during COVID, where step exams have been pushed and pushed and pushed, not because of students, but simply because of testing centers, simply because of, geographic restrictions, where you might have been planning on taking the exam. So I think that is certainly not a red flag, the timeline of when you take these tests. And to be perfectly honest, on the side of an actual reviewer from my residency, I don't even look at the dates of when the exam was taken. I don't. And so I think that some people may, but I think in general, what we're looking for is, did you pass? Did you not pass? How'd you do? And I'm not looking at, what was the date that they took this exam? So really, I think that the USMLE exams they're a checkbox that has to be checked, but they are certainly not the end all be all. And I think that another question I saw that sort of relates to this is in regards to how things are changing also with everything moving, or not everything, but with the step 1 exam becoming pass fail in the upcoming year. So certainly this doesn't apply for applicants who are applying right now, but for people who are applying in the 2022 cycle, some of those people may be taking step 1 and step 2 and being pass fail, but the people who are also applying from the US may have actual numerical scores. And at the end of the day, I don't think that will be held against you by any means, because people, for the same reasons that I just said, people know that people are coming from all these different backgrounds, and when they're taking the exam, they don't really know. And I think that residencies themselves are going to adjust based on the fact that more and more of these programs are going to be moved, or not more and more, every program is going to be next year doing pass-fail step 1 exams. And so don't worry if you're taking it next year because of how your timeline worked out, because of how COVID has changed things, et cetera. Don't worry about that being pass fail. That, again, not a red flag. All of these logistical things that are sort of out of your control, those things you should not be worrying about those. You should not be explaining those, because at the end of the day, the residencies know, and there's so much more that you should be sharing about yourself in the application that's more valuable than trying to explain away these things that really don't matter.
That was an awesome review. I couldn't agree more with that. I'm going to take a second here to switch gears a little bit and move toward a slightly different topic here. would you say that it's okay to send different letters of recommendation to different specialties? And on the other side, can the same letter of recommendation be sent to different specialties?
Yes. So the answer is unequivocally yes. So the first thing I'll say is that different letters to different specialties. So as Sarah sort of touched on a little bit before, depending on the specialty, that can be advantageous to you. If you're applying into orthopedic surgery and family medicine with the plans of doing sports medicine, those, ultimately you probably have somewhat similar goals in terms of what you're interested in. However, orthopedic surgeons, I know from, just residency consulting, they like to see letters from orthopedic surgery. They're going to want to see surgeons who have written you letters and give you actual, feedback on your ability in the OR. Versus family medicine, it's going to make much more sense for you to have family medicine writers writing your letters for those to see how do you do in all the other aspects of the of taking care of patients on the wards, et cetera, because that's a big part of family medicine residency, regardless of what your ultimate goals are. So I think that you definitely should do that, specifically if you're applying to fields that you think it could benefit from. Again, as I sort of alluded to before, family medicine, internal medicine, there can be some overlap, certainly. But what I'll also say is that not every specialty feels that way. So radiology, for example, Fred and I are both radiologists. And so most of my letters were all from internal medicine physicians. I think 3 of my letters were from internal medicine physicians. And I still matched. And so I think that it's very, very important to know your field. And so that's, I keep coming back to this, but talk to residents, talk to faculty, talk to PDs and see what is the vibe of this field? Like, what does my field, what do you look for as a PD? Like, do you want medicine letters? Do you want surgery letters? Like, what are you looking for? So I think that can be very important. And then the second part of that question, what was the second part of that question, Fred? I think I lost it.
Mainly just the flip side. So the question was like, is it okay to send different letters of rec to different specialties? And can you send the same letter of recommendation to different specialties?
Yes. So the answer then is yes. So for example, there are a lot of specialties who require you to apply, for example, to a prelim year, right? So like radiology is one of those, derm, anesthesia, not pathology, but a lot of the specialties do require that. And so some of those letters were the same medicine letters that I, recommend that my students send to their radiology programs. They send the same ones to the other programs, certainly if you're going to a prelim year. But also, if you don't know necessarily what specialty you're applying into beforehand, that's another one of those things where you can just say to your letter writer, I'd love if you were able to write a letter that could be applicable to both. So they say, oh, they're going to make a great surgeon. They could say they're going to make a great clinician, right? So just to use that as an opportunity and just be upfront with your letter writers ahead of time if that's something that you're hoping to do, because then they can plan accordingly. Because again, you're not seeing these letters, so you have no idea what's in them. So just talk to them beforehand so they know what your sort of plans are in the application.
Awesome. I have a little bit of a different type of question here in the chat, but I think it's an incredibly important point to make here. This question is, does it make sense, and what is the official recommendation when it comes to not submitting your application on time and just going into this season with the expectation that you'll go into the SOAP alone without actually doing any interviews like that? What is the stance in your professional opinion?
So so I think that this is very challenging because I completely understand why someone would think that this would be a reasonable course of action. Because the application cycle is incredibly expensive, B, incredibly time consuming, and it can be very emotionally, challenging. What I'll say is we've had students at med school tutors who have tried to take this path, and I don't think we've had a student successfully match that way without entering the actual match. The SOAP process in general, what I'll say is, though there are ways to navigate the SOAP, there are ways to try and, game the SOAP and be as successful as possible. But if you can avoid the SOAP, you should avoid the soap. You do not want to be in a position where you're trying to soap, because the spots, it's a free for all. And at the end of the day, I think that it's as much as you're able to control this process. And I know the match is difficult to control. You could end up anywhere on your rank list. Absolutely. But at least you have some degree of choice, I think. And the soap it's really, really difficult to make educated decisions, because you have an offer and it expires, and sometimes you don't get an offer. So I think that for that reason, I would strongly advise against that strategy. And, at the end of the day, if it's cost prohibitive, if it's, time prohibitive, just apply to fewer programs, but still offer yourself the opportunity of that choice and the opportunity to have some sort of control over the outcome. Soap I strongly advise against that. What about you, Fred? What do you think about that one?
Oh, no, I couldn't agree with you more. The purpose of applying for residency should be to get a position that you match into. The SOAP is a opportunity to fill unfilled positions, which are relatively few and far between. And if you think that you might have a better probability of getting a spot via the SOAP rather than the first time through, the logic there just isn't checking out simply just because of a numbers game. So I think the best and the recommended strategy for everybody would be to apply the traditional way, get that application in on time, right, and go about it the normal way. If it does not work out the conventional way, then going through the SOAP would be plan B.
Yeah.
Just a couple questions here before we take a slightly long break, because we're doing quite well on time here. Now, when it comes to letters of recommendation, and you've applied one cycle already and you did not match, okay, is it okay to use those same letters of recommendation for the following year? Or is it better to maybe get updated letters of recommendation given your whereabouts and the new people you've met in that gap year?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the strength of the letters that you think you have, I will say. So if you think you have two unbelievable, super strong, hard to top letters, then I think it's reasonable to ask, which again, you also don't know because you can't read these letters ahead of time, but based on your relationships with them, I think it would be reasonable to reach out to those letter writers and say, hey, obviously, I was unable to match last year, but I'm applying again. And then give them an update and say, these are the things I've been working on in this year. These are the things, blah, blah, blah. And I would really appreciate if you could update your letter and, if you're able to, So I think that is one reasonable course of action. But I think if you had some truly remarkable experiences during that time, and you have new people who can speak to your resilience, your hard work, sort of the things that you're trying to sell in this reapplication, then I think it would be very, very useful to have that perspective as well. But it really depends on your individual circumstance. So I'll generally say, I think that depending on the strength of your letter, then I think just having them, add a line or two would be completely fine. But if you've had new clinical experiences, new experiences to really show that you've grown a lot as a clinician, I think that makes a lot of sense to just add a new letter in instead.
Awesome. I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And here's another excellent one. Because this year and last year have been so competitive in terms of getting interview spots, is applying to more than one specialty, maybe even sometimes as many as 2, 3, or 4, something that is done or encouraged? And then with that, kind of a part B question to that would be, is it okay to apply to 2 different specialties within the same hospital system?
Right. So it's certainly okay as we sort of, talk about different specialties. I think that's absolutely okay because, if you have different interests, then you can pursue something that you are passionate about through multiple different fields. Most people, I think, could probably be happy in a couple of different specialties. So I think that is absolutely okay. In general, as far as going to the same hospital program, again, the world of medicine is kind of small. So I would err on the side of trying to avoid that if you can. But, certainly if you're geographically restricted and if you have a compelling, story that you can tell them, I think if you apply to the same hospital system, be prepared for the possibility of them finding out and have a reasonable explanation and say, I'm very interested in peds and I'm also very interested in medicine. This is why these are my career interests and I think I could pursue them in either area. And I really want to be in DC. So I think it's very reasonable to do that.
Awesome, Sana. Thank you. I might actually challenge you a little bit on that last point, just from a personal and stuff there, just because we like to have the discourse here. Obviously, everybody listening knows there's no one right answer to a lot of these things, but when it comes to applying in the same region, I totally agree with you. I think that applying to more than one specialty is perfectly fair and reasonable. I know, and you may know as well, Sana, that, because we're both had applied to radiology, which requires in some situations like a backup specialty because it has a tendency to be competitive. Applying to the same categorical spot in the same hospital could potentially cause some questions around your application, like what is this person's true motivation? Because oftentimes, as you said, it's difficult to kind of defend why you would be interested in multiple specialties without an opportunity to interview. And if it may appear a bit split-brained, I'm split-brained, it might be split-brained in the personal statement alone to discuss two different specialties at the same time without sounding like rambling. So I feel like to give, or at least how I advise my students, I find applying to two different specialties in the same hospital system to be kind of a no-go zone in my typical advice. Simply just because program directors from different specialties know each other and talk, and if the same name comes up in different places in the same system, it may raise some red flags from an internal standpoint. So I do caution about that, but certainly from a regional perspective in different hospital systems, absolutely okay to do.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's all I've got in terms of this section. We certainly do have a lot of specific questions coming in from the chat. I will refer those people that for very specific targeted questions about how to deal with very specific situations. Certainly don't hesitate to give us a call when it comes to these kinds of things, and we'd be happy to work with you on this level. We want to cover obviously everybody's concerns. Unfortunately, we only have so much time to be able to do that. So we're trying to hit the heavy hitter kind of broad pieces of advice that we can do. And of course, if there's time at the end and room for some of those, we're happy to contribute. But I think at this point, if there's nothing else that you wanted to summarize or contribute, Sana, at this point, I think we'll just go to a 10-minute break here, and then we'll resume after that, and also a little bit after, and we'll discuss more things like rank lists and schedules and application timelines and more of the objective stuff to come next. So thank you all, and Sana, an awesome section. You rocked it.
Thank you. And before we let you officially go, what I'll just say is I just wanted to announce this round's raffle winner as well. So this round we have Elizabeth Solodoye, who won again the Residency Consulting prize. So Elizabeth, please feel free to shoot us a message so we can get in touch with you and get your information. And the final two winners will be announced in the final Q&A section. So Elizabeth, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll go ahead and take a quick break. We'll come back at exactly 2:40, and we'll see you guys then.
All right, guys, enjoy your 10-minute break. See you at 2:40. All right, everybody, welcome back. My name is Fred Bertino. I am a interventional radiologist in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm really happy to discuss these next couple topics with you here, which I think is a lot more of the nuts and bolts behind a lot of your questions so far. Many of you have been asking about things like rank lists, timelines, thinking about the SOAP couples match. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of the miscellaneous section of what you don't really find out until you're maybe midway through the season or maybe toward the end. And I think it's just a good idea to hear this stuff early on so that the words I'll be using and the timelines I'll be referring to are at least familiar. And at the very least, you know exactly which resources to look for or search when the time comes to register for some of these things. So I'm happy to discuss all of this with you now. What we'll do is I'll speak for a bit. We'll go back into our focused Q&A with my section specifically, and then what we'll do is we'll open everything to a roundtable discussion at the very end, and you'll get all three of our panelists back here fielding questions that come in through the chat, and including ones that we may not have had time to cover beforehand, but we'll try to rehash them as we come back to that. So without further ado, I can discuss some of our next material here. So what we'll basically start here is, how do you declare interest in a program without doing away rotations? You know, this year has been quite unusual. The pandemic certainly has put a halt on things when it comes to putting your best foot forward in person for some of these hospitals. And you want to show that you have interest in a program to try to improve your chances. You can try to connect to these people. Many things have moved to social media. You can follow them on Twitter, on Instagram, even Facebook pages, I'm sure, have some degree of presence there, although I know Med Twitter is quite active. And putting yourself out there and hearing about some of the Zoom conferences that certain programs might be offering for their applicants is a great way to get involved and also make yourself known. Programs will take rosters and attendance of who's actually showing up to these kinds of things, and they'll probably try to match their selection when they finally get to see your application to who actually showed up to some of these Zoom conferences and to learn more about their program. You can reach out via email, but realize that everybody in the world is probably doing this right now. So realize that there's going to be a lot of influx of emails to programs. There's going to be a lot of people trying to weed through them and look for important ones. As you can imagine what it might feel like to have an inbox full of 1,000 unread emails. You can imagine that these programs probably have tens of thousands of them. So please realize that before you start sending emails to places. It's not a bad thing to do to reach out with interest, but realize that it's easy to get lost in the mix with this. So just be very careful when you do it. And a better way to maybe consider what people's impressions are about particular programs is that if you know some alum from your medical school who is at a current program that you're very interested in, it doesn't hurt to reach out to them and ask them questions about the program themselves. They will have an experience at your medical school because you will have both been alums from it, and they might be able to pass a word up to an attending or maybe even the program director about how well you would do at that place, because they might be doing very well at that place. So using those alum connections from your medical school, if you have any, is always a good way to put your best foot forward. After the interview, a thank you email is a controversial topic nowadays. As I said before, it's very easy for things to get lost in the mix. People are applying to more programs, and it's simply a numbers game of yours getting in the weeds or lost completely. Realize that an email or a thank you note may be not commented on at the conclusion of the interview, in which case it would be okay to send one. And many other programs now are saying, please don't send us any kind of correspondence after the interview. It's just overwhelming and it's too much. They know you're appreciative already. If that is their advice to you, I would advise not sending anything. They're asking you not to. There's no need to break the rule and send them one. It's not going to bump you higher on their rank list. I'm sure they would be grateful to not have extra emails to read at the conclusion of it, especially if they tell you not to send one. So just keep that in mind moving forward. When you're personally evaluating programs, before the interviews, you might want to make a list of priorities of what is most important to you in a program. For me, that's something that I did, and I thought about 6 major criteria that I thought would give me a well-rounded radiology education. And some of these things included the fact that the hospital had to have a level 1 trauma center because I needed to know how people break. It needed to have a pediatric hospital affiliated with it so that I know how to read pediatric images and those making diagnosis in children. I wanted a large program. I wanted more than 8 residents per year in a radiology program for me. So these are just some examples of things that you might find important, and be able to kind of stratify which programs are most ideal to you. I would take notes after every interview that you go to, especially with very specific questions that you might have for them. These can help to reinforce or maybe change your feelings about a program and are important to remember when it comes time to making your rank list. Remember that it's called a match for a reason. The whole goal here is to try to match you with a program that will have your best interests at heart and that you know that you can succeed with them. Be very careful when it comes to thinking about questions you may want to ask these programs that are going to be very important for you to get the best education that you can. Remember that this is a process about you becoming an excellent physician and not just so much about getting into the door and doing it. I know it feels like that sometimes, but realize that once you're in that door, you need to be able to succeed to be able to eventually independently make decisions for how you're going to take care of people. So be very, very aware of how you will learn in a given situation and keep that close at hand. Some people may keep a running rank list during interview season. This can be accomplished in a multitude of ways. It could be subjective. It could be objective, like those priorities that I had identified beforehand. I created a scoring system for myself in that every time a program met one of those criteria, I gave it a point. And the ones with the highest scores were the ones that I was going to rank higher than other ones because those were the things that were the most important to me. I do encourage people to do the same. Sometimes people are just more feeling oriented and they know kind of where they want to be based on a gut instinct. And if that works for you, then I think that that's also a great idea. The point is to not betray your own ability to make good decisions for yourself just because somebody else is telling you a different method of it. You know what works best for you. So keep in mind which programs are going to be best. And the best way to do that would be to take notes during the fact so that you have a fresh idea to go back to when the time comes to review. Maintain perspective. This is kind of a reiterative point of what I was talking about before, but realize that your perspective in this process is going to be important because you have to think about what you want. And the grand scheme of things is you need to be in a program that's going to teach you to be an excellent, independent physician, regardless of the specialty, knowing how to manage patients independently, because one day you'll wake up and it'll be no longer training. You'll be independent in your own role, making decisions on your own life. So make sure that you can graduate from a program that will make you feel confident to make those decisions yourself. And then when it comes to evaluating programs, as I said before, they all will have a social media presence now because this is the post-COVID times. We're still not 100% back to in-person everything. So follow them on social media, reach out to people who represent the department well, reach out to people who may have a social media presence in that social media app, and ask them questions about it, or ask if you can set up a time based on their schedule, if they can reach out to you via telephone, or if you can schedule a conference call just to pick their brain a little bit or express some interest in their program and see how well that they can respond to that. Certainly nothing wrong in asking. Something wrong certainly in being annoying, so keep that in mind, but certainly asking a question is not something to be punished over. And again, ask important questions tactfully. You need to know what you want to achieve through every program as you go. And these questions should be carefully crafted to what your interests are. So think long and hard about them. Don't ask too many cliche questions when you're in the interview process. One question that typically comes up all the time from a radiology standpoint is someone who has interviewed medical students for radiology residency is, what is the call schedule like? And while that seems like a very thoughtful question because you're trying to understand what's going on in the program, I'll be honest with you, 99.9% of places are always going to have call, and you will probably forget the call schedules about every single one by the time the application season is over. It's a minor detail. You will be on call a lot, and you will live in the hospital for the next 3 to 7 years, depending upon what your chosen specialty or residency is. So don't be afraid of call, for example. Know that you'll be going into it ready to work wholeheartedly. Think about questions that would affect your education specifically. Think about questions that might influence your decision to choose a place over not choosing a place, whether that has to do with personal factors, whether that has to do with factors involving diversity, equity, and inclusion. If that's something very important to you and you want to be in a forward-thinking place like that, then I think that those are going to be the hard-hitting questions about making you feel like you can practice and learn in a very accommodating environment. And at the same time, asking questions about what resident mentorship looks like over the tenure of your training is also very important to look into, because if you have ambitions of doing something academically or in research or even clinically, like what is it like to get a job after something like this coming from your program, you want someone to kind of shepherd you through that process. And places with more robust mentoring opportunities, or just somebody who's going to be available to guide you in that, is going to be super invaluable to your future. So think about questions like that, thinking about 5 to 10 years down the road, not next year, what is my call schedule going to be like? Not really the question for this. Think long term. We all know you want to help people at this point. Now it's time to think about how you're going to be the best independent doctor that you can be, and how this program is going to help you arrive there. When it comes to ranking programs, I'll talk about how ranking works in a lot of different iterations. I'll talk about things to consider and how you should talk to other people about your geographic location and where you think you should be going, or maybe where your colleagues have applied and what their impressions of certain programs are. I'll also touch a little bit on the couples match, and we'll talk about deadlines as well. So the overview of the match cycle, now the schedule here is still in the works. If you go to the NRMP website, you can Google this online and you'll be able to find it if you type in NRMP 2022 match timeline. And these dates should be reflected. They tend to be set in stone once they're published. The match week, which happens later in March, is not out published officially yet, although we were able to kind of derive when those dates would be estimated. So take some of these dates with a grain of salt, but these should be in full swing. You can Google these dates here. The deadline to register with the NRMP is going to be the opening day, September 15th, and the closing day, January 31st. What this means is that on September 15th, you will go to the NRMP website, register for the R3 system, and that will essentially allow you to buy a token for, unlike ERAS, a relatively inexpensive fee. And that basically is your admission ticket to be able to create a rank list, okay? The rank list opportunity opens on February 1st. So that'll be the first day that you can register for, or I should say create a rank list in whichever order you wish. You need to buy that token before January 31st. My recommendation to my students is to buy it the first day, or at least within the first week it becomes available, so that it is done and you don't need to think about it for the rest of your interview season. On February 1, you can begin to make your rank list. This will be open until March 2nd, so you basically have a whole month to figure out what order you want to rank your programs. And it's nice to be able to play with this. It kind of works in a click and slide perspective, where you can constantly reorder things as things go on. And you don't need to worry about submitting it prematurely or anything like that. Ranking gets automatically submitted. In fact, there is no submit button to click. It just automatically gets submitted on March 2nd at 9 p.m. That happens universally everywhere. The only thing you have to do, and it will ask you this every time you log out of the ranked list system, is if you want to certify your list. What that means is that by certifying it, if the submission date were to happen tomorrow, that gives the green light for your rank list to go to Washington, D.C. to undergo the match algorithm process. My recommendation to my students is to always leave your rank list certified. It's not going to get submitted early. You have nothing to worry about a wrong rank list getting submitted unless you do it at the last minute. But there's nothing worse than having a great interview season and then forgetting to certify your list, and then your list not getting submitted to the algorithm and you not matching because of that. So my recommendation is to always have your rank list certified when you log out of it. Secondarily, it also gives your brain a chance to kind of sleep on it. My rank list is certified in this particular order. How am I sleeping at night with this information? If you're sleeping well, then that means you probably feel like you've done yourself a justice and you've ranked things properly for you. And that's great. That's where we want you to be. If something's not sitting well, then it has you going back to it the next day, uncertifying it, changing the order of things, and then recertifying and basically doing an internal check all of that time. As I said, March 2nd would be the estimated date of when the rank order list certification deadline happens. So if your list is not certified on March 2nd, then it will not be submitted to the algorithm in Washington, D.C. So make sure that it is certified certainly before that date, and you will be off into computer science world where the algorithm will figure out where your future will be. Estimated dates appearing on this slide right here. Again, the NRMP hasn't officially released what match week looks like yet, but on March 14th, you've got the beginning of match week where you will receive an email if you matched. It'll be a binary email saying you have or you have not. And then the have not matched email is also kind of binary, because if you are somebody applying to anesthesia, radiology, dermatology, etc., you may receive an email saying that you have not matched to a prelim position, but you did match to your advanced position, or vice versa. You may have matched to your prelim, but not your advanced. If you received a partially matched email or a non-matched email, that is when SOAP will begin, and you should be eligible for SOAP at that time. On Thursday of that week, one day before the end of the match week, that will be the end of the SOAP session, where all of the unfilled programs will have been posted and hopefully filled at that point. And then March 18th is when the people who found out they did match on Monday find out where they matched at 1 p.m. on March 18th. Oftentimes your medical school may have a celebration or a match party, whether that be via Zoom or in person if we're there at that point. And the medical schools are often notified of match results about an hour before that. So you'll open an envelope maybe with your peers at around noon, and then you'll get the official email about an hour later. This is the match schedule from last year in 2021, and you can kind of see how it parallels what I was talking about in terms of where the emails come out, as well as when the SOAP opens, when the program evaluations for SOAP take place between Tuesday and Thursday. And then Friday would basically be when you have these ceremonies at certain medical schools, or if your school doesn't do that, my school did not do that, then we just got an email at 1 p.m. Telling us where we matched. So March 15th, which is going to be Match Monday this year, is when your match week and your SOAP begin. You'll get that binary email, as we talked about before, if you matched. And if you did match, then there's nothing you need to do until Friday. And if you did not match, then you'll enter the SOAP for one reason or another. You'll notice here on the screen that on the second column of this green area, it says application status certified. You want to see that certified green lettering every time you log out, just in case, to make sure that your rank list gets submitted to the right people. And then if you are SOAP eligible, you will see in green lettering under there what your SOAP status is. If you have SOAP eligibility, then you'll have this tab at the top where the orange arrow is pointing for SOAP, and you can click on unfilled programs, and that will basically tell you what is available and what you could potentially apply to. As of 11 a.m., between 11 and 3 a.m. on that Match Monday, you will log into the NRMP R3 system if you are SOAP eligible, and you will see which programs have unfilled positions. You will only see the kinds of programs that you are eligible for. So if you did match into a prelim program, you will only be able to see advanced positions, PGY2 plus positions that are open to you. And vice versa, if you did not match into a preliminary position, but you did match into an advanced position, you will only be able to see prelims. So basically, it'll show you what you need to move to the next step. On Monday, between 11 and 3, you will log into ERAS. You can apply to no more than 45 total programs. You may upload a new personal statement or letter of recommendation if anything had happened in the interim. It would be wise to write a very short personal statement for the program that you would be applying for, especially if it is not in your given specialty. And these can be cursory. They know that this is a short time period. Nobody plans to not match, so to speak. And they also don't really know what specialties will be available. So I don't want you to worry about making this super specific, but I do want you to focus on your strengths and take some of the influence from your previous personal statement and pare it down to make a new one if it is required for these positions. You can certify your application for the soaked positions at that time. And as I mentioned before, the PGY1 versus PGY2 prelim versus advanced, I've explained this already. Now, you would finish the application process on Match Monday. Okay, this is what this screen will essentially look like. You can pick your programs again. You can search programs. You will create a list of programs in which you wish this, or where you wish this application to go to. And it's not really a rank list at this point. At this point, it is a send out a new application to the programs that need you. And in the following days, you will get offers to have a brief interview with these soapable places. So you've applied, now what do you do? So Monday at 3 p.m., they will begin contacting SOAP applicants by phone or email. So this is the same day after that 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. deadline to submit the application again. That evening, you might begin getting phone calls or emails about offers to talk via Zoom or via phone. It's based on the program. They'll tell you how they want to meet you. You cannot contact a program unless they contact you first. Doing this could be a match violation, and you might be ineligible for any SOAP positions if you violate this. So just please be aware that that is a hard and fast rule. On Tuesday, it's the priority now, the rank list typically prioritizes your preferences because it will match you to the best program that you would like to be at. During SOAP, it's really going to kind of prioritize the program's preferences because now they have the opportunity to extend email or interviews to only people they really think would do well in their place. So realize that now we're kind of shifting to the program's preferences to fill the final spots. After you interview or do some sort of equivalent there, the programs will make their preference list. You don't have to submit a rank list or submit anything after that. It's all on them at this point. And then the waiting period begins until Tuesday at noon, where you will receive some sort of confirmation that maybe you've gotten a spot or that you did not get a spot. Now, these offer rounds, okay, happen, there's 4 rounds, they're 2 hours each, and they happen on Wednesdays and the Wednesday and Thursday of match week. So round 1 will happen at 12 noon, round 2 will happen 2 hours later, and that continues. So round 3 will happen Thursday at 9, and round 4 will happen Thursday at noon. What these basically are periods where they will offer a spot to an applicant. If the applicant takes the spot, then that's removed from the system. Constantly, there will be a cycle of offering new interviews to new SOAP eligible medical students, applicants. So you could get interviews between Tuesday and Thursday theoretically, although many places will not be doing that because oftentimes they've interviewed everybody they want to see, but it could be possible. And because of that, my recommendation to you is that if you have a spot offered to you, you should take it no matter what. In my mind, it is better to have a job at the end of the day. It might not be your #1 location or geography or hospital or specialty, but at the end of the day, it's probably better to match into something than to not match at all. So I would recommend that you take the position if one is offered to you. They will be offered to you in the rank system. So that's the R3 system through the NRMP. And the offer acceptance or rejection will also happen in that same system. Again, if you let things expire and give no answer, it will basically count as a rejection at the end of the 2-hour offer period. And if you are offered something, I cannot emphasize the importance of just taking that spot. I do recommend that that be the best situation. Now, I mentioned this, that you can apply to programs in between these offer rounds, but many of these programs on Wednesday and Thursday are not looking at new applications. So it would be your prerogative to get these applications out in that 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. period on Match Monday, and allow Wednesday and Thursday to be interview days and offer days. There is no benefit to holding off on your 45 total slots from the beginning. Fill them up, apply to all 45 of them on that 4-hour period that you have, and let the rest happen. Applying to several days later, they may not look at that application and those spots may already be gone, leaving you fewer opportunities. So play all of your cards up front in this situation. On Thursday, if you accepted a position, then you're done, which is great. You can only accept one position, even though you may be offered more than one. And you will not get an email on match day because you already know where you're headed. After each round, the R3 system will update with remaining spots. So again, it's important for you to get all of those applications to 45 positions as early as possible on Monday. And any remaining open spots on Thursday, March 18th, will be updated to the R3 system, and you can contact these programs on your own to discuss potential openings outside the match. But I would not recommend doing that anytime before Thursday at 3 p.m. Anytime before that would be a match violation, so please keep that in mind. You're going to want to contact them early. So again, Monday is the day to do this. And on Friday, if you've gotten the yes, congratulations, you're matched email, 12 p.m. is the day that you will have that ceremony, most likely at your medical school, and 1 p.m. typically is the time that the letter or the email goes out to everyone. So let's talk about couples matching here. This is a little different. We have a poll question coming up in a little bit. I'm just curious to know how many of you out there might be interested in couples matching, because it's a bit of a different game. It is harder than matching on your own because now you're matching for two. And when I say for two, it really could be any combination of anything: spouses, siblings, partners, friends, or family members. There's really no limitation of who can couples match in this situation. Before this webinar, we were actually talking amongst ourselves, and you could, in theory, enemies match with someone in the hope that maybe you would end up on different ends of the country. But again, that's a bit more dangerous to do, and you would be better off just ranking independently. Do not enemies match. I think it would count against you based upon how the algorithm factors couples in. A ranked pair is how couples matching works. Basically, it's a match for two people. It doesn't look at one applicant's list separately than the other ones. It's a paired ranked list, which basically means that if you apply to, if person A applies to one program and person B applies to the other program, if the program would rather rank somebody outside of the couple higher than one of you, that spot will be given to that individual match applicant or rank applicant. So realize that the couples match outcome actually favors the weaker applicant in the pair. And for whatever that means, that could be somebody with maybe a weaker application in general, or maybe had a poor interview at a particular program, or for whatever reason, whomever is ranked lower on that program's list, that's who the result will generally favor. So how can you maximize your chances as matching as a couple? And the way to do that would be to list a large set of combinations between you and whomever you're matching with, to maximize your chances of being somewhat close to each other. What I mean by a large set of combinations is that when you enter this, you can rank more than, you can rank up to 99 combinations of programs. Any more than 99 requires a fee to be paid. And you can, on any one individual's rank list, rank the same program more than once, because it will appear in a different combination with your partner. So realize that that is one way to try to maximize as many ranked pairs as possible. And there is also a code in NRMP for couples called a no match code, which basically means that if one applicant would match at program or hospital A, and the other partner would rather be unmatched than to have their partner not be matched, then your partner could potentially put a no match slot in that one to allow person A to get their desired slot. It is a strategy. I recommend ranking those no match codes toward the very bottom of your rank list, because what that will do is it will allow you to both match in a specialty in a program, ideally in some sort of geographic location, than one of you not matching, or hopefully both of you not matching at all. So couples typically apply to and rank programs in similar geographic areas to optimize your chances of matching in a common location. If you want to be separate, then apply separately. Do not go through the couples match. It will weaken your chances. Programs can be ranked more than once on each program list to create as many combinations as possible. And as I said before, this will allow up to 99 programs before a fee occurs. You cannot rank a pair of programs more than once, but you can rank combinations of hospitals if some are repeated more than once. So my example of that would be hospital one, you both want to go to the same program, okay, maybe in different specialties, but the same program. That's okay to do once. If you rank that situation more than once, then the R3 system will find that and say this is a duplicate and you have to remove it. You can do as many times as needed. Hospital 1, Hospital 2, Hospital 1, Hospital 3, Hospital 1, Hospital 4, that's fine. But again, you cannot match the same pair more than once. So you cannot rank Hospital 1, Hospital 2, and then Hospital 2, Hospital 1. It's not really going to work that way, okay? The no match code can be ranked again. I talked about this before, but only do it if the partner ranking the no match code is willing to go unmatched. Other concerns that come up is that I know we have a lot of international colleagues on the line here. Your application process and rank process is no different than those people of U.S. graduate medical school. I was an international medical graduate, and my application process was really no different. There's a little bit of strategy that goes into it, but really your submission process and your ranking process should be no change. The differences will be that programs will want to see an international medical graduate step 2 result, whether that be pass-fail at the time that you take it or with a score, does not matter, before the rank order list is done. My advice is that if you are able to, you should take it in the late summer or early fall to be ready for this application cycle. When I took mine, it was in August of my application year. I had a result by mid-September, and I was on time for my submission date, which was sometime around September 15th. I think my score got uploaded to the ERAS system about a week after I submitted my application. You can update your ERAS application with new forms as they become available, and programs know to look out for these updates. The reason why this is important is because you need step 2 to be completed and passed before you can achieve your ECFMG certification. And that ECFMG certification certificate is paramount to you being able to start work on July 1st as a resident. So doing this earlier is going to benefit you in this process of having a successful match, because essentially you're giving the program a bureaucratic guarantee that you can start work on July 1st. There's something else to be said about this, about applying to programs that will allow for certain types of work visas depending upon where your country of citizenship is. It's important to do this research on your own to know which hospitals and which programs will allow for certain visa status to have international medical graduates participate in their residency programs. Some of these reasons why many international students cannot get residencies is because their hospital system is just not equipped to manage applicants for work visas during whatever particular time for whatever reason. So do your homework. Look into these programs and make sure that they will sponsor your required visa before you apply there. It will save you some money and some time to not worry about it if they aren't going to accept it anyway. So that is my advice to all of you. And you will want to get that ECFMG eligibility by passing your step 1 and step 2 as early as possible to guarantee to those programs that you can continue on July 1st. Otherwise, the rules are the same. Good letters of recommendation and a strong personal statement are super important for IMG matching success. These should come from U.S. doctors to show that you've had U.S. clinical experience if you want to apply to a U.S. residency. It sounds a bit biased, but when you think about it objectively, it's kind of true. You're applying for residency in the United States. You're going to want to have some degree of U.S. Physician credibility in the form of a letter of recommendation to prove that you are eligible for this. Obviously, this is not a hard and fast rule, and people with extensive research foundation in their home country or their country of original training can do quite well on their own. But oftentimes, in my experience of counseling, but also interviewing for these people and being on these panels, the international medical graduates who do well without some of the homegrown experience are the ones who have CVs that are could arguably make the person a full professor within one day of work at these institutions. So be realistic about this process. If you're applying for residency in the US, you're going to need some sort of credibility process for a physician to attest to your clinical ability who works in a US system. And that's just kind of the fact of the matter here. So be aware of that. Look for some degree of opportunity to reach out to people, to find shadowing opportunities, to find US colleagues who can speak to your strengths moving forward. Something new this year is the Supplemental ERAS application. It's a new free supplement for internal medicine, general surgery, and dermatology applicants only, okay? It is not required for any other specialty. What this is designed to do is to take a holistic approach at evaluating you, the applicant, by asking you some more specific questions to basically give programs an idea of what they can offer you to best meet your learning needs and to meet what you need to succeed as an applicant in their program. In late summer of this year, you can check with programs to see if ERAS supplement is optional or required. There's no official statement on that yet. You can figure that out in late this summer. You do not need to fill out multiple supplemental applications. One application will do. It'll be universally applied to medicine, surgery, or dermatology, so there's not any specifics that you need to worry about, so one and done. For medicine, the supplement will be available to preliminary applicants and categorical applicants, and for surgery programs, only categorical applicants may be required to fill out the supplemental application. Dermatology is an advanced field. You need a preliminary spot to do this anyway. So I would just follow the role of what the dermatology programs tell you to do on the website if that is where you are applying, and check with the programs in late summer 2021 to see if it is required or just optional. The timeline, at least proposed right now, is that you can get these preparation materials, the actual application, and then more robust information about the supplemental application should come out sometime in August, so next month. Be aware of this. The supplemental application should open around September 1st. The supplemental application will close on September 30th, so you have 1 month in September to fill out the supplement. And then the data from that application will basically go to programs sometime between the end of September and October 6th. There are some caveats here at the bottom where the supplemental application submitted by September 19 will be available to programs 10 days later, and those submitted in the 10 days to follow will be submitted around October 6th. No one here at MST nor in the world can speak confidently about whether getting this in earlier or not will lead to a more successful match for you. But I guarantee you, if there's going to be 2 submission dates, it will not, I'm sure it will not be counted negatively against you in this process. I wouldn't worry too much about getting it in the first deadline versus the second deadline. These are all very arbitrary things, and programs know that they would be foolish to discount people submitting it in maybe submission phase 2 versus 1 because of a silly date error. So don't worry about it there, but realize that if your program is requiring it, you will want to get it in before the closing deadline of September 30th. My recommendation to people is earlier is always better. So with this, I am basically finished with my session here. What we can do is I can turn things over if Sarah wanted to come back in and discuss some of the consulting and results section here.
I just want to talk to you about how we can help you with this process. I know it is incredibly stressful, especially with a lot of the changes, COVID, all of things that have been in flux in the last 2 years. So our residency consultants and med school tutors are in just about any specialty you can name. And we are at a wide range of programs all over the country. And we have specific residency consultants in our program who represent a lot of different backgrounds. We're from all over the country. We have different degrees, MD, PhD, MPH, people who are DO degrees. We have consultants who are IMGs and FMGs themselves who have successfully matched. We have people representing the military match, as well as the specific ophthalmology and urology match, which have their own criteria and their own timeline that we're not really going to get into today. And we also have people who have couples matched. So people can bring both their experience through working with their advising students, as well as their own personal experience to help you get through the process. So in terms of our data, our success, in the last 2 cycles, we've had more than 74 to 91% of our consulting students match. Now, what does that mean? Before COVID, our number was 90+%. I think across the board, last year was a very difficult year for the match because 30 to 50% more applicants applied in every single specialty. So it was a little bit less for us last year, but we are happy that 3/4 of our students were able to successfully match. And last year we had students apply in all of these different specialties, surgical, medicine, psychiatry, etc. And we have a list of just a few of the programs that they matched into at the bottom. So if you have any questions at all about this process, don't gamble and don't just make it up as you go. Reach out to our front office. We can get a consultation with one of us to at least talk through your application and help guide you through any of the questions you might have along the way. So things we can help you with, how to address those red flags. I know we're giving you general advice today, but especially for red flags, it's easier to hear your specific circumstances to guide you what you should do about it and how to address it. We can edit your personal statement. We can help proofread your ERAS application. We do practice interviews, especially now in this virtual format. We can help you navigate that situation. We can help you find programs and make sure that your list is a good, broad range of programs. Talk through your rank list. We can even coach you through the SOAP week, which is a very stressful time for a lot of people. And then we can give you very specific advice if you're in a unique circumstance, like you are an IMG or you are someone who is applying many years out of medical school or you're couples matching. So please reach out to us at any of these platforms, social media, our phone number, or the email. And the 3 of us, as well as our whole army of tutors, are here to help you with anything you might need. So with that, I think we're going to address any of the questions that we haven't quite gotten to so far. If Sana and Fred, it looks like you're both here. So I have a long list that I've been writing down, but if you guys want to keep typing in questions, I'll keep scrolling the chat and picking out some of the ones that I think are broadly applicable to a lot of people here today. So some of the first sets of questions, a lot of people had questions about step exams and whether they need to have step 1 and step 2 scores before they apply in September. If they had a lower step 1 or step 2, should they take step 3 before September? And kind of how you would generally advise people to take their steps. Sana, why don't you tell us what you think?
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, certainly if you have a lower score in the past, I think it would be advisable to take it before September if you're able to. Obviously, that is in now a month. So if you're able to, I think to show that you're continuing to work on it. Most places will consider your score or will download your application, again, that end of September date that Sarah already talked about. So I think in general, it will be helpful to show a delta if you're able to do so. Having said that, if there's absolutely no way that you can get it done, I think it's understandable. I recommend most of the time that my students try and get their exams done before they have to submit their rank list. Certainly step 2 should be done before you're submitting your rank list, because a lot of programs will not, depending on the specialty, depending on the residency, a lot of programs will not rank you unless they see a passing step 2 score. But I think if you want to show a delta, then it's more important to take it earlier, but certainly you should try and take it before January.
You have anything to add, Fred?
There we go. Yeah, no, I agree with Sana. I think, step 1, step 2 is assurance to programs that you are ready to begin on July 1st. That is what the purpose of having both of them completed will show. As I said before as well, for our international colleagues, having both of those scores submitted beforehand will essentially have you eligible for your ECFMG certificate, which is required before July 1st. So you must have those exams, especially if you fall into an international category like myself. And even if you are just applying in general, it's never a bad idea to have basically everything that is expected to be completed during the medical school years completed before residency begins. Step 3, oftentimes you will not be eligible to take until you graduate medical school. So once you finish your medical schooling, then you can take it whether you are matched or not matched. And to speak to that part 2 of that question, if you did not match, it is not a bad idea. In fact, maybe encouraged to study hard for step 3, take step 3 in that gap year with whatever else you are doing, and prove to programs that you are ready to go and have a full unrestricted medical license, because that is how you will eventually obtain one on a state basis.
So shifting gears a little bit, there were a lot of questions about red flags, both specific and broad. So I think the first question is, what if you're not sure something is a red flag? Do you deal with it? Do you not deal with it? What should you do?
Yeah, so I think in this case, individual circumstances are really helpful. And this is where I think, one of our free consultation sessions would be really useful, so we can get a sense of what your situation is, so that we can speak more specifically. I think when in doubt, if you're not sure, then if you think it might be an issue, if you think that a program might be wondering about it, then if you're really not sure, then, and you've spoken to your program director at your institution, et cetera, if you've spoken to people and you still don't know, when in doubt, I guess I would say probably just err on the side of talking about it if you think that a program is going to have concerns, and then sort of talk through your individual circumstance. And but definitely, start with talking to your peers, talking to the people at your institution, or people who have applied before you, to see if they think it's legitimate. Certainly, reach out to us, but when in doubt, I would say go for it and just talk about it.
Now, Fred, what if you have multiple red flags? How should you address that?
Great question. Multiple red flags should be addressed honestly and upfront, but again, we will emphasize not to perseverate on them. Multiple red flags will forever be red flags unless you've done something to rectify them. Okay, you have to show that you have overcome whatever that might be a detriment to your application, and how you've overcome that issue and how you fixed it. Remember that being a physician requires you to be a problem solver. And if you have problems that are affecting your personal application, people will want to see how you solve that problem, how you got over it, how you were more confident to tackle it. And if there's more than one issue, then it's worth discussing. And you may have the opportunity to discuss that during the interview in a little bit more time. But remember, the personal statement should be an area to be upfront and honest about it. Keep it brief, don't perseverate, be honest, and be declarative in how you are changed as a result of the red flag and how you will continue to go on an upward trajectory.
So just to go a little deeper on that, some people were concerned if they're in the interview and people are asking them questions they don't feel comfortable answering about their red flag. Let's say it was a medical concern and an interviewer is asking them very specific questions that are personal. How would you respond to that?
Excellent clarification point. So there are some hard and fast rules that program directors and interviewing people are not allowed to ask you during interviews. They are not allowed to ask you your marital status, your family situation, anything personal about you, your faith beliefs, your practices independently, your medical history, your sexual orientation or gender identification. They are not able to ask you those things in the interview. It really should just be limited to objective things about why you would be the best person for the job, and a little bit more on a personal level, simply just to get to know you as a person, your hobbies, interests, things that you enjoy. That said, you are at liberty to volunteer any personal information during the interview that you feel comfortable sharing. They just are not allowed to ask you about it first. So if those things were to come up and they started violating those kinds of interview contacts, you are perfectly reasonable allowed to say, I personally do not feel comfortable answering that question. I don't think it necessarily reflects my work ethic at the current time, and it is a personal matter. But I'm happy to tell you more about how I was able to overcome the issue or the red flag that you're perceiving without going into any details about what the specific event was. I think that's a perfectly professional way to answer it. You're not being confrontational, but you are being assertive that you are allowed to have some privacy in this situation. And if a program is going to hold that against you, then that is not the program for you. That is a pathology of the culture of that place. And if they will hold that against you, then that is not a place that I personally would want to be associated with. So use that as almost a blessing to know where would be a good place to train and where wouldn't.
I agree. I would even add, Fred, that if people really push you on some of those questions, that's actually a match violation, and you can report that program to the AAMC. So that's not to say that when I was on interviews, people did not cross some of those lines. And it is your right to set any boundaries that you feel comfortable with, as long as you do it politely and professionally. So another question that has come up a couple of times is about Step 2 CS. So Sana, does it still exist? What happens if you failed it before, or what happens if you passed it before?
Yeah, so at this current point, Step 2 CS is sort of on hold indefinitely. So certainly for those of you who have not taken it, don't worry about it. It's not required. You don't need to think about it before A, applying to ERAS, B, graduating medical school, and C, starting residency. So if you haven't gone through it, you don't have to. And so, I mean, I personally am of the opinion that I think it may be gone forever, but at that point, that is not yet 100% certain. But it's at least on hold indefinitely. For those of you who have it already on your application, those of you who may have done it already in years past, I mean, I don't think it's going to help or hurt you. I think it's just going to be something that programs at this point, my expectation, obviously I can't speak because I'm not a program director, I expect that programs are just going to ignore it moving forward, unless there was a significant concern, like if you had multiple failures in the past, then again, you could address it as a red flag. But certainly if you passed it, then I wouldn't worry about it. I don't think it's going to make a big difference.
Okay. Another thing that people have been asking is, we have a couple people with us today who have had an extended time since they finished medical school. Either they are an IMG and have been practicing their specialty in their home country for a few years, or they've been doing something else that's non-clinical. How would you tell them to approach this process? Either Fred or Sana, whichever.
Yeah, I think I can just briefly say, I think that the personal statement is a perfect place to sort of talk about that, especially because really, I see the personal statement as sort of this is my story and this is why I'm going to be a good resident. And I think that is such a huge part of those individuals' stories. And if you've been practicing clinical medicine for, outside of medical school for a while, that is an incredible asset. And I think that most programs will see it as such. So I think really, talk about your journey. And yes, the rest of your application may look a little less conventional in terms of, oh, you weren't, in a certain like student organization, but that's because you were practicing real medicine. So I think that using the personal statement to really talk about your clinical experiences, talk about what you value in being a doctor, and talk about why you want to practice medicine in America, I think those are all really huge parts of that story. And if you can sell that in a compelling way, and honestly, I think it's an advantage to be able to have that story, because I think it's just so, it really shows that you actually, you can definitely do it, right? Like if, you know, all of us are kind of saying like, we think we can do it, but you can definitely do it. So I think that I'm really using the personal statement as the opportunity to share your story is the way to go.
Definitely. I've worked with a lot of different students who have an extended time, up to a decade since medical school. And I think as long as you address what you've been doing during that time, is it because you've been practicing medicine, you've been working for an NGO, or you've been doing public health work, or you're in research, or you've been getting a different degree, all of those are wonderful assets that you're going to bring to this application. I think the extended time only becomes a red flag if you haven't really been doing anything during that time. And then that's something we could advise you on individually. So a couple of people are kind of concerned about this year's cycle. Someone mentioned that last year there was a lot of interview hoarding, that now you don't have to pay to fly to interviews, that some of the very top applicants were doing a lot more than they normally would. How would you advise people about how to approach that this cycle, Fred?
Great question. I think the easy answer is to say many people will be broadly applying to many different programs. And that is certainly the more common route as what will happen. But that comes with the caveat of what is being financially amenable. I realize that this is not an inexpensive process, and it can be very hard financially for many people to apply for such widespread programs. If you have the means, then applying broadly is what is really officially recommended, because there's really no shortcut around this. It's an unfortunate truth. People are applying to hundreds of programs in various specialties, depending upon how many are out there. And I can't say that I'm in support of it, or any of us are, because it's unfair. But you have to do whatever you can to try to increase your probability as well. I will say that if you are a strong applicant, you probably do not need to apply nearly as broadly. So you can rest a little bit assured that through the process of going through your applications on the program side, they will come across yours and look favorably upon it and offer you an interview. More applications correlate statistically with more opportunities to interview, simply just because you've given your application to more programs. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you will match. It really all depends upon how well they like you when they meet you in that moment. I wish that there were more concrete rules about this, but there really isn't. If I've missed anything, I'll flip things over to Sana to see if she can cover where I've left any gaps.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And it is challenging because, you know, there's not much that we as individuals on an individual level, there's not much you can do about interview hoarding. I think it's just a psychology of, you know, this entire process. And I think it's understandable. Like Fred said, applying broadly, if you have the means, is the only thing that you can do, because that's sort of what everyone else is doing. But what I will say is I think that programs also, especially with the last year, I think this year we benefit a little bit from having gone through this process once, because programs also found that people were interviewing at way more places, and programs often fell further down their lists for that same reason, because again, a lot of the same applicants were applying to way more programs and interviewing at way more programs, but not necessarily matching there, right? So I think that people will be more judicious about perhaps the interviews they give out, in terms of, you know, who they think realistically may come to the program. I mean, one can hope, who knows? This is all sort of speculation on my part. But I think the biggest thing that we can do is sort of, you know, apply broadly and just try and make the best of the virtual interview setting as you can.
Shifting gears, something that we haven't really talked about. Fred, you mentioned connecting with programs on Med Twitter and other social media platforms. Some people were concerned about how to present themselves online. Should they create like a whole new professional Twitter? Is it okay to have some personal stuff in there? What if you have particular political beliefs? How do you navigate the new online field?
Yeah.
Excellent question. If you're going to join Twitter as a representative of your career path, then it 100% needs to be a professional Twitter. It doesn't mean that you can't share fun stories of your life and your family and a little bit of a glimpse into like what makes you you. I think that's encouraged. But realize that if you're going to stand there and take a political stance on something quite strong that is often polarizing, realize that it is your absolute right to do that. It's social media and you are allowed to represent yourself however you like, but it is not a hospital's or organization's right to have to still like you or take you. They can make decisions too because they share those same freedoms. So my advice is to hold yourself in a light that is professional. You can be a little bit personal and share stories of your family and a little bit of your background and what makes you unique and enjoyable and things like that. But think twice before posting anything potentially controversial or that could be looked upon negatively by organizations and people within those organizations, because at the end of the day, they retain that ability to deny you a position just as much as you have a right to say the things that you are entitled to say. That said, my med Twitter is entirely professional. I use Twitter as purely a clinical, not even clinical, to be honest with you, because I don't actually give any medical advice over Twitter. I use it as an opportunity for networking and people reaching out to me and me reaching out to other people and building collaborations and meeting new colleagues. I encourage you all to do the same. It's a great avenue to have program strengths and opportunities to meet programs and people within those programs through Zoom conferences now that everything is remote. Those things will generally be advertised on Med Twitter. And it's a great way to connect with other people also going through this process and make some friends. So keep that in mind going forward. Proceed with caution. Choose a professional headshot or a professional photo of yourself. You can customize your banner on Twitter, of course, to be something close to home or something that you hold dear, and have a little Twitter bio in there that represents you as a person and as a professional and what you're interested in professionally, because this will be a good flag to wave and signal the eyes and ears of people out there who can help you achieve your goals. And you can look at, I'm not sure if Sana or Sarah, if you guys have Med Twitters either, but if you do, I encourage you to look at all of ours. We're on there, searchable by our names, I'm sure. And, take a look at how we've crafted ours and see if you can draw some inspiration that way.
I mean, I have differed a little bit, Fred. I think my Twitter photo is a picture of me with my daughter in a bumblebee costume. But I think part of my identity as a doctor is as a doctor mom. So that is something I feel comfortable sharing with the world. I think a general approach I have taken is to have Twitter as a professional space. And then I have other social media platforms that are private, and there are things that I share with family members. So just creating the boundaries of whatever platforms you feel comfortable having a program see versus things that you only want to share within your close social networks. Also be aware that if on Instagram you are following or followed by people who are residents at those programs, people can see through, a network of what's on there. So be aware that even if a site you have set as private, if anyone is your friend who is at a program, there's access there. So another question, a lot of people had questions about advanced versus prelim, transitional, whether or not you need separate letters of recommendation and separate personal statements if you're doing an advanced specialty with prelim programs, or whether you can use the same for both.
Yeah, so I can take this one. So Fred and I both have gone through this ourselves, and also with our students. So many specialties require you to have preliminary years, including like derm, optho, radiology, anesthesia, etc. And so what that process entails is just it's honestly you apply to sometimes double the number of programs because you'll apply to your advanced position, for example, your anesthesia training, your derm training, your radiology training. Those are all your advanced programs. And then that 1 year, you can do prelim, transitional year in. So the prelim year can be in honestly anything, but most commonly medicine, surgery. And then your transitional year, those are years really designed to be an integrated experience, couple months on surgery, couple months on medicine, etc. So you'll apply to those as your 1 year program that you do before entering your advanced. In general, I think that all programs that you apply to for a preliminary or transitional year spot know that you're applying for a 1 year spot. And so they know that you're going to be going to, a different specialty down the road. In my personal statement, and what I've told many of my students to do is the entire personal statement is the same, and then maybe change that last paragraph about, why you're interested in dermatology, why you want to spend a year in a robust surgical year, or in a robust medicine year, in a diverse transitional year. So really just talk about why you want to do what you want to do for that 1 year, but the vast majority can be the same. The letters can 1000% be the same because, as I said, all of these programs know that you're applying for a 1 year program. They know that your interest is, ultimately to go on to an advanced specialty and something else. So I think that's completely kosher.
Okay. So I have 3 last questions, but before we do that, I want to announce our last 2 raffle winners are Jeff Brown and Shelby Weekont. So please reply in the chat and let us know how to contact you best, but congratulations. We'd love to hear from you. So our last 3 questions that we want to talk about is some of our IMGs are trying to figure out where to apply. And so there were some questions about are there state-specific rules about IMGs, and can they rely on websites like Residency Navigator or Match a Resident to give them like a list of IMG-friendly programs? Fred?
I think, yeah, no problem. Yeah, excellent question. I think the best place for that information is going to come from the hospital's website, because that will be the most up-to-date and most authentic information for that. And as I was saying before in my previous session, it really probably comes down to, 1, have they taken or matched international medical graduates in their programs before? You can usually kind of see trends in how a program may rank or match their residents or where they may come from. So that's one thing to do, is look at their match history. 2, check with your medical school. Oftentimes they will publish match results, and you can see, or even just other people's medical schools, other Caribbean medical schools or other international medical schools, to see where those students have matched to know if there is some legitimacy in them taking international medical graduates. 3rd, the program's website should have that information, and that really will be based upon either their trends, but also the hospital's ability to accommodate work visas. That's very, very important, and something that should be done when you are researching these programs. We, unfortunately, do not have an exhaustive list of which programs do and do not. Maybe Match a Resident or Residency Navigator may have this information. I hope that if you're paying for a subscription for these services, that they should update these things for you, because that's a good piece of information to know. And if not, then you'll have to kind of make a spreadsheet yourself and kind of keep track of what's going on with that. So that would be my recommendations to figuring out if those things are eligible. Sarah, did I catch all of the question, or was there a second part to that I didn't?
No, I think that's all of the question. And usually I advise my students that if you're going to use one of those services, that's usually a good list to start from, and that you should then confirm on all of those programs' websites that they do accept IMGs and that you fit their criteria. But at least it can give you a place to start. It wouldn't be the only thing that I would use. So Sana, my last question for you is what's the difference between a university-based program and a community-based program? And if you're applying to both, how would you advocate for yourself at one versus the other?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. And I think really important when you're making your application list and certainly when you're making your rank list. So university-based programs are usually affiliated with a medical school. And so what that means is they have, medical students who rotate through the medicine clerkship, et cetera, the surgery clerkship at the various sites associated with that hospital. And what that also means is that you have, I think this is more of a cognitive part of it, is the attendings at that institution are generally much more invested in teaching, because that's, there's a lot more research and funding that goes into research organizations there. There's a lot more education-based initiatives. So I think that the focus of the attendings there will be slightly different. Having said that, the cases may also be different. And this is a little bit variable depending on what type of university institution, but university institutions are typically, because they're research institutions, can be more complex tertiary care centers where you will see more complicated and sicker patients. And are often referral centers for many, many different community hospitals. So the caseload is going to be quite high at most university hospitals, and you're going to see a very wide variety of sick patients. So I think those are the first important things to know about university hospitals. Community hospitals are much more sort of, they don't have those things, but they're much more bread and butter medicine is what I've found. And many university hospitals have you actually rotate at community hospitals as well, depending on the program. For example, at my own medical school, it was a university hospital, right? Because they were affiliated with my medical school, but the internal medicine residents also rotated at local community hospitals to get that bread and butter, small community hospital feel without the tertiary care and with some, basic medicine admissions. So you don't miss out on that experience as well. So some university hospitals have both. Community hospitals just have a smaller feel to them. And the teaching opportunities will vary based on where you go. So I think that as far as advocating for yourself, it really depends what your career interests are. If you're interested in being in a small community and you want to deal with sort of bread and butter medicine, wide catchment area, and just take care of the local community, then a community hospital may be a great place to train. If you're really interested in research, living in a city and having that high-powered academic career, then a university hospital may be a better place to train. So I think those are sort of the big things that I would put it as considerations when you're making that decision.
I think I would just add that if you're applying to both, make sure in your personal statement that you don't talk all about how you want a major research career for your community-based hospitals, because that will be a red flag to them that they're not what you're actually looking for. So that might be one of the few times that people have two slightly different versions of the personal statement, is one for kind of university research-based tertiary hospitals and another one for community-based. But if you're someone who wants to do primary care, your personal statement is probably the same for both types of programs. So the last question I'll just answer is, a lot of people had a lot of questions about this supplemental application, because probably we're a little vague on it because they have not actually released what it is or what the questions are on it. We know no more than what the AAMC has released, but I will share with you that they are having a webinar in August where they are going to go through in detail what the supplemental application is, what the deadlines mean, and kind of what programs are going to use it. So we'll refer you to there, and as we get more information in future webinars and such, we can go over that with you. So thank you all for being here today. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Sana, for joining me. We have loved talking with you. I hope this has been helpful and we've answered as many of your questions as we can. I apologize for anyone who we didn't get to, but please reach out to us if there's any lingering questions or if you'd like our help with anything. Our email, phone number, website are all there below. And you might be matched with one of us or any one of our other colleagues at Med School Tutors. Good luck in this process. I know it's incredibly stressful, but you will get through it. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.